He said it live, in front of millions. Chuck Norris is nothing but a broken cowboy from the past. And the silence that followed was heavier than any punch. It wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration, spoken on a stage that broadcast into homes across America. The lights of the Los Angeles arena burned white-hot, buzzing faintly as if reacting to the words themselves. Every camera tally light glowed red, steady and merciless. The echo carried into the rafters, over the sea of bodies, over the cables that snaked across the floor like black veins. The Rock stood at the center of it, microphone in hand, smile spread wide, his body language tuned to perfection. He was at the peak of his fame, bigger than the sport itself. He flexed when he didn't need to, played to the crowd as naturally as breathing, soaking in their cheers. He owned the lights, owned the space. When he spoke, his words didn't sound like sentences. They sounded like victories. And opposite him, Chuck Norris, older, quieter, planted on his mark as though his boots were nailed to the tape line. No glitter, no theatrics, just denim, a jacket, and the posture of someone who wasn't there to win over a crowd. His hands hung loose, his eyes steady. He looked out at the arena with the kind of composure that can't be faked, the kind that unsettles because it doesn't ask for attention. It draws it. The contrast was sharp enough to make the audience restless. One man commanded noise, the other, silence. And silence inside a space built for spectacle is dangerous. The Rock spread his arms wide. You had your moment, cowboy. But that was yesterday. Today belongs to me. The arena erupted. High in the stands, young fans shouted his name. Rocky! Rocky! A chant that rolled like thunder around the dome. Down lower, older voices pushed back with their own rhythm. Chuck! Chuck! Slower, heavier, like a drumbeat from the earth itself. The chants clashed, a war fought in sound. The cameras cut to Chuck, waiting for him to speak, to defend himself, to give the production team something they could use for replay packages. But Chuck only adjusted the mic in his hand, thumb brushing the ridge near the base, and looked out into the crowd. No smirk, no insult in return. Just that stare. And somehow, that silence pulled more attention than the Rock's roar. The host, standing between them like a referee dressed in a suit, cleared his throat into his headset, trying to reel it back. Gentlemen, let's keep this civil. The Rock cut him off, leaning toward the cameras. Civil? What's civil about dragging out a relic? He's here to remind you of VHS tapes and bad mustaches. He's not a fighter anymore. He's a nostalgia act. Laughter broke from the younger half of the arena, sharp and cruel. But down near the floor, a different sound began. Boos, low and insistent, like the hum of an engine. The split was clear. This wasn't one man against another. It was generations colliding in real time. Chuck finally lifted his gaze to the Rock. The camera zoomed in tight, catching the lines in his face, the calm in his eyes. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just looked. And for the first time all night, the Rock's smile wavered, barely, like a mask that didn't fit as easily as it used to. A murmur spread through the crowd. They could feel it, the imbalance. The Rock had thrown the hardest punch words could offer, and the older man hadn't even raised his hands to block. He'd taken it, absorbed it, and somehow left the younger star looking unsettled. Behind the scenes, a director barked, "Stay on Norris," and every camera obeyed, pushing tighter into the stillness that was now louder than any chant. Chuck raised the mic a little, the motion deliberate. The entire arena leaned forward in unison. You could feel 20,000 people holding their breath, waiting for a comeback line. A declaration. Something that would split the room wide open. But Chuck didn't speak. He lowered the mic again, leaving the silence intact. The Rock, thrown off rhythm, tried to laugh it away. See? Nothing left. No words. No fight. Just a ghost. He paced, pumping up the crowd with broad gestures, forcing them to roar louder. But under the noise, there was a new current running through the arena. A doubt, unspoken but present. The chants collided again. Rocky! Rocky! Versus Chuck! Chuck! But this time, the second chant carried more weight than before. It wasn't just nostalgia anymore. It was defiance. The host stepped forward, visibly sweating under the stage lights. All right, let's move on. But nobody in the audience moved on. They weren't looking at The Rock anymore. They were looking at Chuck Norris, who hadn't said a word, and yet somehow had the room in his grip. And in that silence, heavy as stone, a question was already forming. What would happen when the noise met the calm in the ring? Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down, bellow. By morning, the insult had already mutated into headlines. Rock humiliates Norris on live TV. Chuck finished? Clips flooded social media before the production trucks even cleared the lot. The words looped endlessly. Broken Cowboy. Broken Cowboy. Every replay slowed on Chuck's face, waiting for a grimace, a flinch, anything. But the stillness was all they got. That absence of reaction became its own kind of bait. Everyone wanted to know whether silence meant defeat or a storm waiting for the right hour. Talk shows pounced. Radio callers in Houston shouted, "He should stay home." A podcast host in Chicago countered, "You don't poke a man like that unless you want to bleed." Sports sites ranked odds like it was a title fight, not a publicity stunt. The Rock at -400. Chuck barely even on the board. For a younger generation, it was comedy. For an older one, it was insult. The debate spilled into living rooms, gyms, and break rooms across the country. By the time the press conference rolled around, the tension had already grown teeth. The arena floor had been dressed for spectacle. Long black tables with bottled water lined up like ammunition. A backdrop wall plastered with logos. Rows of folding chairs pressed tight together for media and a few select fans. Camera rigs leaned forward like vultures, lenses clicking open and shut. The crowd wasn't massive, but it was concentrated, and the noise they made carried weight. Half the room was young, wearing shirts with The Rock's name across the chest. Their chants of Rocky. Rocky came bright and rhythmic, bouncing off the walls. The other half wore older denim jackets and boots, gray hair under baseball caps, arms crossed, and their chant was slower, heavier. Chuck. Chuck. It wasn't just noise, it was history refusing to be erased. The two men entered from opposite sides. The Rock first, smile wide, hand raised in a mock salute, showman to the bone. He high-fived a kid in the front row, winked at a camera, even paused to flex in the direction of the chants that carried his name. His energy filled every corner, designed to leave no silence untouched. Then Chuck. No wave, no grin. Just a steady walk to his seat, eyes forward, as if the crowd wasn't even there. He moved like a man used to, walking through noise without needing to answer it. The younger fans booed at the lack of acknowledgement. The older ones didn't care. His restraint wasn't weakness to them, it was discipline. The host began with pleasantries, but the words fell flat. The Rock leaned into his mic, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Look, we can all pretend this is about respect," he said, teeth flashing. "But what you're really watching is the end of a rerun. He doesn't belong here. He belongs on cable at 2 in the morning, when nobody's watching." The crowd roared, half in laughter, half in anger. "Rocky! "Rocky!" drowned the boos for a moment. Then Chuck, Chuck, fought back, thicker and slower, until the room split into two dueling rhythms. The host tried to calm it, but nobody listened. The arena itself had become a third fighter. Chuck sat still. He didn't reach for his mic. His face didn't change. To some, it looked like surrender. To others, it looked like patience sharpened into a weapon. The Rock thrived on the split. He stood from his chair, pacing across the stage like a panther in a cage. "You hear that? They don't even believe in you anymore. The only ones chanting your name are the ones who still rent DVDs." He laughed, broad and loud, playing to the youth in the back. They howled with him, banging on the metal barriers until their palms turned red. And then he did it. He walked right over to Chuck. The crowd howled at the movement. Even the older fans held their breath. He loomed over Chuck's chair, hand reaching out, landing on his shoulder in mock brotherhood. His laugh rolled, deep and taunting. "You got anything left, cowboy? Or should I thank you for showing up to pass the torch?" Every camera swung tighter. Reporters stopped typing. The chants faltered, replaced by a hush that pooled across the floor. You could feel the silence push down on the room. Chuck didn't move. He didn't brush the hand away. He didn't look up at the younger man's grin. He just turned his head, slow, until his eyes met the Rock's. No smile, no sneer. Just a look, steady as stone, long enough that the laughter in the back row cracked. Long enough that even the Rock's grin wavered, just a fraction, the mask slipping under the weight of it. The room was silent now, thick as tar. Even the hum of the lights seemed to hush. One man was loud. One man was quiet. And for the first time, the balance shifted, not by sound, but by silence. The lights dimmed until the arena glowed with nothing but cell phone screens and the thin white stripes of exit signs. Then the music hit, deep bass rolling like thunder under the floorboards. A spotlight cracked open the darkness, sweeping across the stands, finding the ring in the center. The crowd surged to its feet, half screaming, half chanting. The energy felt electric, humming through the ribs of everyone present. The Rock came first. His walk was a performance, shoulders rolling, chin up, arms pumping as though every step deserved applause. He pointed at signs with his name, slapped the metal railing, leaned into the cameras that moved along the aisle. Every motion screamed dominance, control, a man certain the night was already his. He stopped halfway down the ramp, flexed, then spread his arms wide as fireworks crackled overhead. The roar of "Rocky! Rocky!" swelled to the rafters, nearly drowning everything else. Then came Chuck. No fireworks, no theatrics. Just the faint sound of boots on the ramp. He walked without hurry, eyes forward, hands loose. The spotlight caught his face and showed no grin, no fear, only that same steady patience. The cheers for the Rock still echoed, but from the lower levels came the older chant, "Chuck! Chuck!" It was slower, heavier, more like the pounding of war drums than a fan cry. If the Rock carried noise, Chuck carried gravity. Inside the ring, the contrast sharpened. The Rock bounced on his feet, shadowboxing, blowing kisses to fans in the front rows. He tugged at the ropes, flexed his chest, made the space his stage. Chuck stepped between the ropes like a man entering a barn, calm, measured. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't feed the cameras. His gaze fixed only on the younger man across from him. The bell rang. The Rock exploded forward. His power was obvious. The floor shook under his stride, every muscle moving like machinery built for force. He swung early, wide, aiming not just to connect but to send a message. This would be quick. humiliating, decisive. The crowd roared at the speed, chanting his name in waves. But Chuck didn't meet him head-on. He slipped to the side with minimal movement, barely enough to see. The Rock's punch cut air, the sound of his effort louder than the result. Chuck didn't counter, not yet. He simply watched. The Rock swung again, faster, harder. Another miss, then a kick, heavy, meant to rattle ribs. Chuck shifted back a half step, the strike brushing fabric but not flesh. His body moved like it had no wasted energy, each dodge just enough to matter. The difference was stark. One man burning fuel, the other conserving it. The crowd noticed. The chants began to split again. Young voices stayed with the Rock, screaming for impact, for spectacle. Older voices found rhythm in Chuck's restraint. Every miss, every narrow escape, drew new gasps. Frustration crept into the Rock's grin. His attacks grew sharper, louder. He hammered at Chuck's guard, forcing him into the corner, swinging with the confidence of youth and strength. And then it happened. He connected. A clean shot across the shoulder, loud enough to echo. The crowd exploded in cheers, a wave of triumph crashing over the ring. But Chuck didn't stumble. He absorbed it, turned with the momentum, and for the first time struck back. It was almost invisible. A short movement, a flicker of hand and body. The Rock lunged again, and Chuck's counter landed, quick and precise. A sound like a hammer on wood cracked through the ring. The Rock's head snapped to the side, his feet tangling under him for a moment. The arena erupted. Not cheers, not boos, screams. Shock rolled across the stands like a storm front. Even those chanting, "Rocky!" a moment ago now shouted without knowing what side they were on. The Rock straightened, blinking, his grin gone. His chest heaved harder than it should have so early. He looked at Chuck with something he hadn't shown all night: disbelief. Chuck, by contrast, looked unchanged. His breathing was calm, his expression steady. He didn't follow up with wild swings. He just reset his stance, waiting. Another exchange followed. The Rock attacking in bursts, Chuck evading with minimal motion, slipping through the chaos like water around stone. Each time, the younger man spent more energy, and each time the older one gave less. By the end of the round, the difference was visible. The Rock's chest rose and fell like a bellows, sweat already tracing down his forehead. His showmanship dulled, replaced by a thin edge of worry. Chuck stood at center ring, unshaken. His boots barely shifted. His eyes were clear. He looked not like a man trying to survive, but like one who hadn't even started yet. The bell rang again. The chants didn't sound the same anymore. "Rocky! Rocky!" carried less certainty. "Chuck! Chuck!" carried more force. The crowd wasn't mocking or nostalgic now. They were nervous, excited, unsure. And the Rock, for the first time, looked like a man who had stepped into something larger than himself. The minute between rounds stretched like a fault line. Cameras crowded the Rock's corner, feeding close-ups to the giant screens. His chest rose too fast. Sweat glistened along his temples, cutting tracks through makeup that had looked flawless an hour ago. He forced a grin, flexed his shoulders, but the strain showed in his eyes. The mask of untouchable confidence had slipped, and 20,000 people saw it. Online, the story was already rewriting itself. Comment feeds scrolled across arena screens. Chuck's back. The Rock underestimated the Cowboy. Clips of the counterpunch replayed endlessly, slowed down to catch the precise second disbelief hit the Rock's face. In living rooms and on phones across the country, the narrative flipped from comedy to suspense. Across the ring, Chuck sat as if none of it touched him. He leaned on his stool, calm, eyes down on the canvas. no towel across the shoulders, no frantic instructions in his ear. His corner man gave a few clipped words. Practical? Forgettable? Chuck nodded once, slow, as though confirming something he'd already known. He never looked at the rock. That indifference did more damage than any strike so far. The noise of the crowd shifted. Where the first round had been dominated by chants of "Rocky! Rocky!" Now a heavier rhythm was taking hold. "Chuck! Chuck!" rose from the lower seats, rolling upward like thunder. The rock's name still rang out, but thinner, punctured by doubt. The arena had become an argument no one could win cleanly. The bell for the second round hit. The rock burst forward, a storm of muscle and fury. Hooks, jabs, a low kick, each one thrown harder than the last, every strike screaming urgency. He wanted dominance back, wanted the crowd to roar without hesitation, but urgency leaked into sloppiness. His punches stretched too wide, his kicks landed too heavy. Chuck didn't match speed with speed. He didn't need to. He leaned, pivoted, stepped just far enough aside to make the rock miss clean. His economy looked like arrogance, every dodge measured, every movement almost lazy. When a fist whistled past his cheek by less than an inch, the entire arena gasped in unison. For a heartbeat, silence drowned the noise. The rock snarled, pushed harder. He chased Chuck across the ring, fists hammering, sweat spraying. But each time he thought he had him, Chuck slipped away with a tilt of the shoulder, a sidestep, a subtle pivot. The crowd started to laugh, not cruel, not mocking, but amazed laughter at the precision of it. Every miss made the rock look more desperate. Every dodge made Chuck look more untouchable. One exchange left the rock tangled in the ropes, gloves smacking empty air. He ripped himself free, cursing under his breath, but the microphones caught it. Chuck just watched, steady, then drifted back to the center of the ring as though the ropes had never been involved. He didn't raise his hands, didn't taunt. His stillness was the taunt. The rock tried again, drawing on raw power. He threw a punch so hard the ring post rattled when it missed. Chuck slipped under it, barely moving, like he'd seen it hours before. A murmur spread through the arena, heavy as fog. It wasn't disbelief anymore. It was recognition. The younger man's strength wasn't breaking the older one, and the older man wasn't even breathing hard. The rock's face betrayed it first, a flicker around the eyes, a tremor at the corner of his mouth. For the first time, fear crept in, not of being hurt, but of being unable to prove himself. His fists still swung, but the rhythm was gone. His movements no longer told a story. They screamed frustration. Chuck let him see it. Let him feel it. Not by gloating, not by showboating, but by standing there, calm, exact, and untouchable. When the bell ended the round, the fighters stepped back, but the moment lingered in the air. The rock's chest heaved like a bellows. His grin was gone. His eyes looked across the ring and saw not a relic, not a ghost, but a wall he hadn't found a way through. Chuck turned calmly toward his corner, body relaxed, face unreadable. He moved like a man for whom none of this was surprising. And the crowd knew the truth. The show had turned into a test. The third round opened with a rhythm that didn't belong to the referee's bell or the commentators' voices. It belonged to the crowd, their noise reshaped into something taut, concentrated. Gone was the playful heckling, the half-ironic laughter at seeing two men of different eras sharing a ring. Now every sound carried weight. The chants weren't competing anymore. They were layered, tangled, pushing the fight toward something larger than spectacle. The Rock tried to retake control with the only language he knew: force. He came forward heavy, throwing combinations meant to overwhelm by sheer mass. His punches cracked through the air. His boots thundered across canvas. He wanted the audience to see inevitability, to believe he was gravity itself. But inevitability needs rhythm, and rhythm was gone. Chuck didn't resist the storm. He redirected it. Each dodge looked too simple, each sidestep too neat, and that was the cruelty of it. Precision-making power looked clumsy. He didn't waste a breath, didn't widen his eyes, didn't break sweat in visible ways. He just moved, exact and unbothered. The Rock's frustration boiled. Every time he missed, the weight of the arena pressed heavier against his back. He threw wider, faster, as if noise could compensate for accuracy. And that's when Chuck finally spoke. It wasn't loud. The microphones didn't catch it. The words slipped across the tiny space between them, meant only for one pair of ears. "You're fighting the crowd," Chuck murmured. "Not me." The Rock's expression faltered. For half a second, his shoulders hitched, his guard dipped. The line went in like a blade, sharp and quiet, slicing past the noise. The younger man swung again, harder, too hard, missing again. His grin didn't return this time. His jaw clenched, sweat flew from his brow. He looked less like a showman now, more like a man cornered by his own reputation. Every blow carried the same desperate demand. "Cheer for me! Believe me! Remember me as untouchable!" The crowd sensed it. Their laughter stopped. Their chants thinned. Now they leaned forward, quiet, studying, as if afraid they'd miss the moment when the truth finally declared itself. Chuck let him burn. He let the storm run until the air inside the arena was ragged, until the Rock's chest heaved with each breath. And then he found his opening. It wasn't a strike designed to break. It was a movement designed to teach. The Rock lunged, sloppy from fatigue, and Chuck caught his momentum with a turn of hip and a shift of shoulder. A simple redirect. The younger man's mass betrayed him, folding under its own speed, and in one fluid motion, Chuck placed him on a knee. It happened fast, too fast for the crowd to process at first. 1 second, the Rock was charging. The next, he was down on the canvas, one hand braced to steady himself, breath bursting from his lungs. The sound in the arena detonated. Gasps, screams, shouts, whistles. It was chaos, disbelief, awe. For the first time, the Rock had been put on display not as a conqueror, but as a student. Chuck didn't follow. He didn't strike again. He didn't even step closer. He simply eased back, raising a hand in a gesture that could be read a dozen ways. "Stand up. Try again." The image burned into the arena's memory. One man kneeling, the other standing calm, leaving space where he could have finished it. Commentators stumbled over their words, their voices cracking, torn between calling it humiliation and calling it respect. The Rock's fans shouted in protest, their voices strained, but even they couldn't cover the truth of what they'd seen. The older chant rose louder than it had all night. "Chuck! Chuck!" Heavy, unrelenting, shaking the rafters. On the ground, the Rock's face twisted between rage and disbelief. He wanted to spring back up, to erase the image of his knee on the canvas, but his body lagged. His chest pumped, his arms trembled just enough to betray the weight of the moment. Chuck didn't watch him with triumph. He didn't smirk. He waited. His stillness was worse than mockery. It was a reminder that this wasn't about victory. It was about lesson. The Rock finally pushed to his feet. The noise around him swelled, not with confidence, but with expectation. He shook his arms, shook his head, tried to summon the swagger back, but something in his eyes had shifted. They weren't the eyes of a man entertaining anymore. They were the eyes of a man who had been asked a question he wasn't sure how to answer. The referee stepped between them briefly, but the pause did nothing to dilute the tension. The Rock kept glancing across the ring, trying to find weakness. Chuck stood steady, boots firm, eyes calm. The crowd had seen strength redefined. For decades, they'd been told strength meant size, speed, spectacle. Now they saw it as control, patience, the refusal to waste. And once seen, it couldn't be unseen. When the round ended, the bell cut through a storm of noise so loud the walls trembled. The Rock slumped on his stool, towel whipped across his face, chest rising like a piston. Chuck sat as he had before, shoulders loose, breathing even. He could have been in another place entirely. The commentators tried to frame it as an even fight, tried to protect the narrative, but the truth was on the screen. The Rock had touched the canvas. Chuck hadn't, and when Chuck gestured for him to rise, it wasn't just to continue a match. It was to continue a lesson the whole world was now watching. When the fourth round began, the air inside the arena felt different. The chants hadn't stopped, but they had changed texture. No longer playful, no longer divided cleanly. It was a roar that shook through the steel beams overhead, restless and raw, as if 20,000 throats had merged into one. Everyone stood now, some shouting the Rock's name, others Chuck's, but together they formed a single vibration, a sound that felt less like cheering and more like warning. The Rock rose from his stool without a smile. Gone was the showman's grin, the exaggerated gestures, the playful nods to the cameras. His jaw was set, his eyes darker than before. Sweat dripped steadily from his brow, his chest still heaving, but his body looked reorganized, shoulders squared, fists low, legs braced. He wasn't entertaining anymore. He wasn't even performing. He was dangerous in a new way, stripped of spectacle. Chuck stood as if he'd been waiting for this version all along. Calm, posture loose, no visible fatigue. His boots pressed into the canvas, eyes level. He didn't stretch, didn't bounce, didn't fan the crowd. He just looked, ready, as though he'd walked into the moment years before and left it waiting. The referee called them back to center. The noise swelled until it blurred into static. Both men stepped forward, but it wasn't symmetrical anymore. The Rock carried heat, a flame starved for oxygen. Chuck carried silence, the heavy kind that bends sound around it. The first exchange confirmed the shift. The Rock didn't throw wide anymore. He didn't chase the highlight reel hook. He came in compact, sharp, precise. A jab that snapped rather than thundered. A low kick that landed like punctuation, not drama. Even the commentators stuttered. "That's different," one said, the word cracking mid-syllable. The crowd faltered, unsure whether to boo or cheer. This wasn't the Rock they'd bought tickets for. It was something colder, unfamiliar, and infinitely more dangerous. Chuck slipped around the strikes, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. He felt the change. This wasn't a man swinging for approval anymore. This was a man who had finally realized his reputation was on the line. Pride is heavy, but desperation is heavier, and the Rock had both strapped to his shoulders. Another exchange, jab, slip, counter-feint. Chuck leaned, rolled, absorbed. But the rhythm was closer now, harder to ignore. For the first time, his economy of motion was tested. The arena swayed with tension. Some fans screamed for the Rock to finish it. Others begged for Chuck to end the lesson for good. But everyone felt it, that this round had broken free of performance and stepped into something real. Halfway through, the Rock landed a clean body shot. Chuck absorbed it, but the sound echoed through the microphones like a door slammed shut. The crowd erupted, then hushed again, waiting to see if it mattered. Chuck's face didn't shift. He adjusted his stance, rolled his shoulders once, then reset. The message was clear. Not enough. The Rock's eyes flickered, not with fear this time, but with something wilder. He pressed again, throwing combinations tight, heavy, no wasted motion. He was chasing not just a win, but redemption. Chuck parried, redirected, slid away. But even his calm looked tauter now. The Rock's new stillness was dangerous, harder to read. The arena felt it too. The chants broke apart, replaced by a low, collective growl of anticipation. 30 seconds left in the round. The Rock circled slower, shoulders hunched, breath steadying. Chuck mirrored, quiet as ever. They met at center ring again, eyes locked. In that stare was the truth of it. Youth against age, fire against patience, muscle against experience. Not just a fight, but a question carved into the air. The Rock moved first. Not the way he had before, not the predictable hammer swing of earlier rounds. He cut sharp, fast, sudden. A feint inside, then a strike no one expected. His fist shot forward with terrifying precision, a line drawn straight toward Chuck's jaw. The cameras caught it in full detail. The crowd's roar broke mid-note into a scream. Time stretched. The punch flew, Chuck's eyes fixed on it, his body beginning to turn. And then, silence. The story froze there, balanced on the edge. Was it the moment Chuck's experience saved him? Or the second the Rock finally found the way through? The broadcast cut it frame by frame, slowing to a crawl. Chuck's calm gaze locked to the oncoming strike. The Rock's fist burning with everything he had left. The bell had not yet rung. The answer had not yet come. And the entire arena, every voice and every camera, was left with the same unbearable question. What weighs more, the power of youth or the wisdom of survival?